The proximity alarm reverberated through the narrow corridors of the UNSS Fortitude like a racing heart. Captain Eleanor Vance didn't need to look at the monitors to know something was terribly wrong. She had only ever heard that specific tone in apocalyptic scenario simulations. 30 seconds prior, her retrofitted cargo vessel had been navigating at subluminal speed through the Asheron corridor, transporting medical supplies to a mining colony on the outer rim. Now her communications panel exploded with fragmented transmissions in 17 different alien languages, all screaming the same thing. Run. Flee. Death. The bridge door hissed open pneumatically. Jake Morrison, her chief engineer, stumbled in, his blue uniform stained with synthetic grease. His wide eyes told a story his mouth still struggled to form. Captain, Coalition emergency channels are saturated. Sector 9's defense fleets, they just vanished from sensors. Eleanor felt the icy air of disbelief crawl down her spine. Sector 9 was home to the 3rd Keltharian Fleet, considered the most advanced military force in the known galaxy. Their battlecruisers could deflect asteroids with gravitational fields, and their particle beam weapons melted entire moons. Define vanished, she said, keeping her voice steady as her fingers danced over the navigation console. Not destroyed, vanished, as if they never existed. No debris, no residual energy signatures, no... Lieutenant Kai Chen interrupted from the sensor station, his new London accent heavy with tension. Captain, I'm detecting a gravitational anomaly advancing from Vector 285. It doesn't match any catalogued natural phenomenon, and it's moving. Eleanor crossed the bridge in 3 long strides. The holographic screen showed a dark blotch against the starry void, an absence of light that seemed to devour even the distant stars behind it. The computer's spectral analysis algorithms displayed only error lines. Speed, 0.7 light, and accelerating. Impossible. No known vessel could maintain superluminal propulsion for more than a few seconds without disintegrating its own molecular structure. That wasn't a ship, it was something different. Communications Officer Sarah Okonkwo spun in her chair, her normally serene face now etched with lines of concern. Captain, priority transmission from Coalition Central Command. It's Admiral Thexlar himself. Eleanor hesitated. In 20 years of service in the Terran Expeditionary Force, she had never exchanged a single word with any member of the High Council. Humanity was still considered an emergent, technologically backward species, tolerated only because their trade routes were convenient. Humans did not receive invitations to important meetings. They certainly didn't receive direct calls from admirals. On the main screen, the image that materialized was disturbing. Admiral Thexlar, a Keltharian whose physiology resembled a bipedal crustacean with crystalline chitin plates, was visibly wounded. His left carapace showed deep fractures, and the bioluminescent fluid that served as his blood slowly seeped out. Behind him, the command bridge of his flagship was in chaos. Exploded stations, flashing emergency lights, toxic greenish smoke filling the air. Captain Vance of the human vessel. This is Admiral Thexlar of the CG Indomitable. I require your immediate assistance under Galactic Emergency Protocol Omega-7. Omega-7. Eleanor knew that code only from military history lessons. It was the mass extinction protocol, the last resort when there was nothing left to lose. Admiral, this is a civilian cargo vessel with minimal combat capability. Surely your fleets... My fleets no longer exist, Captain. The translated Keltharian voice carried something Eleanor never imagined hearing from such a proud species. Genuine fear. The entity we designate as the Shadow has adapted and neutralized all our conventional tactics in 47 minutes of combat. It learns, it absorbs, it evolves faster than any war system can react. Morrison leaned in and whispered in Eleanor's ear. Captain, with all due respect, we have nothing that can help against something that defeated the Keltharians. Our ship is 120 years old. Our shields barely withstand Category 2 solar storms. Eleanor knew he was right. The Fortitude was a relic of the second expansion, kept running more by human engineering stubbornness than by any real technical merit. Her railguns were designed to repel pirates, not to combat existential threats. But there was something in the Admiral's gaze, a kind of calculated desperation that Eleanor recognized from her own darkest experiences. What exactly are you asking, Admiral? The image flickered as another explosion rocked the Keltharian ship. When it stabilized, Thexelar was closer to the camera, his 4 upper limbs intertwined in a gesture humans had learned to recognize as supplication. The Nexus Gate. It must be closed, or the Shadow will have unrestricted access to the inner sectors of the galaxy. 2 trillion civilian lives, 63 inhabited worlds. All will be consumed in 72 hours. Kai Chen pulled up historical data at his station. Captain, the Nexus Gate is the largest artificial structure in the galaxy. It's 300 kilometers in diameter and was built 18,000 years ago by the First Coalition. Destroying it would be impossible. Morrison completed. Its defenses were designed to withstand supernovas. Literally. Its defenses assume logical and strategic attacks, Thexelar said, and now there was something new in his voice, something that sounded almost like desperate hope. You humans have a reputation. They say your solutions to technical problems are unpredictable, unorthodox, even dangerous. Eleanor felt a bitter smile form. The galaxy called it primitive, jury-rigging, the human inability to follow established protocols. But now, apparently, the very trait that kept them out of the Council was exactly what made them valuable. How much time do we have, Admiral? The Shadow will be within range of the gate in 6 hours. We are evacuating as many civilians as possible, but the process takes time. If you can slow the entity's advance, even for minutes... Sarah interrupted, her voice tense. Captain, I'm tracking evacuation ships in adjacent sectors. Entire colonies. Families. There are transmissions from school nurseries and orbital hospitals. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. 43 crew members, against a force that had decimated entire fleets in less than an hour. The odds were not just unfavorable, they were statistically non-existent. But there were children on those evacuation ships. And if there was one thing humanity had learned in its turbulent centuries of history, it was that odds only mattered if you cared about them. Lieutenant Chen, set a course for the Nexus Gate, maximum speed. Morrison, I want you in engineering. Take everything that isn't essential to keep the ship flying and turn it into something explosive. Morrison blinked. Captain, you heard me. Remove the safety regulators, divert power from non-critical life support systems, and tell me exactly how much damage we can cause if we're willing to never need the ship again afterwards. A slow, dangerous smile spread across the engineer's face. Now you're speaking my language, Captain. Eleanor turned her attention back to Admiral Thexler. The Keltharian watched her with what she interpreted as a mixture of shock and something close to respect. Admiral, we will buy your evacuation time, but I need complete data on the gate's internal structure, everything you have. Sending now, Thexler replied. There was a pause. Captain Vance, I despised your species as primitive. Now I see that perhaps true primitiveness is ours. For depending only on logic when survival demands something more. The transmission cut out. Eleanor watched the screen darken, feeling the weight of 42 lives beyond her own rest on her shoulders. Sarah approached, her voice low. Captain, you know this is a suicide mission, right? Yes, Eleanor replied simply. But it's our suicide mission, and we're going to make it something the galaxy will never forget. The Fortitude turned in an impossible arc, her fusion engines roaring beyond recommended limits, accelerating towards a destination no rational calculation would approve. But then, humanity was never very good with rational calculations. The Fortitude's briefing room was not designed to accommodate the entire crew at once. With 43 people squeezed into a space sized for 15, the recycled air smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. Eleanor stood in front of a holographic screen displaying the data transmitted by Admiral Thexler, aware that every pair of eyes fixed on her sought answers she wasn't sure she could provide. All right, everyone, she began, keeping her voice steady. I'm going to be direct. What we're about to do defies all conventional military logic. We're taking an obsolete cargo ship against a threat that obliterated the galaxy's finest fleets. The chances of us surviving are statistically insignificant. Heavy silence filled the room. Then, from the back, Dr. Yuri Petrov's raspy voice cut the tension. So it's a normal Tuesday for us, Captain. Nervous laughter echoed. Eleanor allowed herself a brief smile before continuing. The goal isn't to win in direct combat, it's to buy time for civilian evacuation. 6 hours to save 2 trillion lives. To do that, we need to do something no advanced civilization in the galaxy would consider. We're going to destroy the Nexus Gate. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, weapons officer, whistled softly. Captain, with all due respect, our railguns wouldn't scratch the paint of that structure. We're talking about a megastructure that has withstood 15 galactic wars. Exactly, Eleanor replied, zooming in on the gate's image. The structure floated in space like a divine ring, its energy systems generating a pale blue glow, visible light years away. It was designed to withstand conventional external attacks, but Morrison discovered something interesting in the engineering archives. The chief engineer stood up, connecting his tablet to the projection. Complex technical diagrams replaced the external image of the gate. The gate's energy core operates based on industrial-scale antimatter containment. 8 primary reactors, each containing energy equivalent to a miniature supernova. The Keltharians designed the system with absurd redundancies because, well, they're obsessed with safety. And how does that help us? Kai Chen asked. Morrison grinned with that dangerous expression Eleanor had learned to recognize as a prelude to his most insane ideas. Because redundancy assumes systems will fail gradually. But if you overload all 8 reactors simultaneously, if you force a feedback cascade, that the safety protocols weren't programmed to handle. You create a gravitational singularity, Dr. Petrov completed, his eyes wide behind the antiquated glasses he insisted on wearing. A small one, but enough to collapse the gate's structure in on itself and trap the shadow on the other side, Eleanor added, or at least delay it long enough to complete the evacuation. Sarah Okonkwo raised her hand hesitantly. Captain, there's an obvious problem. How do we reach the energy core? The structure has automated defense systems that would vaporize our ship before we got within 100 kilometers. We're not using the ship, Eleanor said. We're using the structure itself, against itself. She zoomed in on a specific section of the plans. Maintenance tunnels running like veins throughout the megastructure. The gate is 18,000 years old. It was built by a civilization that no longer exists. The security systems have been updated dozens of times, but the basic infrastructure remains the same. And look here. Her finger highlighted a network of narrow passages. Access tunnels for maintenance drones, too small for ships, but the perfect size for humans in EVA suits. The defenses weren't programmed to detect organic threats in these corridors because no coalition species would be crazy enough to attempt an infiltration on foot. But we are, Maria Santos said, and there was admiration in her voice. We are crazy enough. Eleanor nodded. 5 volunteers, an infiltration team carrying a modified antimatter device straight to the heart of the gate. Meanwhile, the Fortitude draws the Shadow's fire, keeping its attention away from the ground team. Morrison was already scribbling calculations on his tablet. I can modify one of our emergency antimatter charges. It won't be pretty, and it will definitely violate about 47 galactic security treaties, but it'll work. The problem is temperature. Explain, Eleanor said. These maintenance tunnels weren't designed for life support. Readings show temperatures fluctuating between minus 180 degrees Celsius and 200 degrees positive, depending on proximity to energy conduits. Our standard EVA suits weren't made for those extremes. Then we modify the suits, Kai Chen said simply. Add extra insulation, divert power from non-essential functions for cooling and heating, 3 hours of autonomy at most, but it should be enough. Eleanor watched her crew, seeing the transformation happen in real time. Fear giving way to determination, uncertainty being replaced by purpose. This was something the galaxy's older civilizations had lost in their pursuit of technological perfection. The ability to improvise when all was failing. I need 5 volunteers for the infiltration team, she said. I won't lie. The chances of return are practically 0. If the plan works, we'll be creating a gravitational anomaly that doesn't discriminate between friend and foe. 42 hands shot up simultaneously. Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. Pride, fear, admiration for these ordinary people who chose to do something extraordinary when no one expected anything from them. Morrison, you lead the technical team. Petrov, we need you to set up the device on site. Santos, Chen, and Okonkwo, you make up the rest of the team. The rest of the crew remains on the Fortitude under Lieutenant Ramos's command. Carlos Ramos, a veteran pilot with more scars than hair, nodded grimly. I'll keep this sardine can flying as long as possible, Captain. I know you will, Eleanor replied. Everyone. She paused, meeting each pair of eyes in the room. Eat something. Rest. Call your families if you can get a comm connection. Because once we start, There will be no time for anything but survival. The meeting dispersed into organized activity. Eleanor remained alone for a moment, watching the Nexus Gate projection slowly spin. Behind it, the dark blotch of the shadow continued to advance, an absence that devoured the light of the stars. Morrison returned before she could leave. "Captain, may I ask a personal question?" "Of course." "Why did you say yes?" "We could have run. No one would blame us. It's not our war." Eleanor considered the question carefully. 3 years ago, the Fortitude was transporting refugees from a war zone in the Perseus Arm. We had a catastrophic life support system failure. Oxygen for 12 hours, but 19 hours until the nearest rescue. Do you know what happened? Morrison shook his head. No one panicked. Mothers started singing to children to keep them calm. Engineers worked tirelessly to stretch every minute of air. People shared their oxygen rations with the weakest. And when rescue finally arrived, with 47 minutes to spare, we didn't lose a single life. She turned to face Morrison directly. The galaxy calls us primitive because we don't have perfect energy shields or antimatter weapons. But they've lost something we never have: the ability to care for each other when everything falls apart. So yes, Jake, it's our war. Because on the other side of that gate are people who just want to live one more day. And if we can give that to them, then every second we buy is worth it. Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, a deep understanding passing between them. "I'll build you the prettiest damn bomb the galaxy has ever seen, Captain." "I know you will," she smiled. As Morrison left, Eleanor activated her personal communicator. There was a message waiting, sent by Admiral Thexelar 3 minutes ago. She opened it, expecting coordinates or tactical updates. Instead, she found only one line of translated text. "May the ancestors protect your journey, Captain. For the first time in my life, I have hope, because I know human madness." Eleanor switched off the communicator and walked to the observation window. Outside, stars streaked past as the Fortitude accelerated beyond its design limits. Somewhere ahead, an ancient portal awaited, and beyond it, a darkness no technology had managed to stop. But technology wasn't all humanity had to offer. Sometimes, desperate improvisation was exactly what the universe needed. The Fortitude's engineering workshop had never been designed to withstand the level of activity Morrison was coordinating. Cables snaked across the floor like metallic serpents. Tools floated in temporarily deactivated zero gravity, and the smell of solder and superheated polymers permeated every cubic inch of air. At the center of the controlled chaos, suspended by improvised magnetic fields, was the device Morrison had built in the last 2 hours and 43 minutes. It didn't look very impressive, an antimatter containment sphere the size of a basketball, surrounded by a support structure covered with wires and repurposed components from practically every non-essential system on the ship. But Kai Chen, watching from a safe distance, knew that clumsy mass of human technology contained enough energy to vaporize a small moon. "This is absolutely insane," Chen said, admiration and terror competing in his voice. Morrison didn't look up, his fingers working with microscopic precision on a control panel. Insanity is relative. To the Keltharians, this would violate about 78 safety protocols. To us, it's Tuesday. It's Thursday, actually. You get my point. Chen chuckled despite the tension. It was amazing how human humor persisted even in the face of imminent annihilation. He had read Keltharian anthropological studies on the subject. They called it adaptive psychological dysfunction. Humans called it survival. Containment system status? Morrison asked. Stable, Dr. Petrov replied, his eyes fixed on a tablet showing energy readings. But only while in passive mode. The moment we activate the arming sequence, we have exactly 42 minutes until inevitable detonation. 42 minutes, Morrison repeated. The universe has a sense of humor. On the bridge, Eleanor watched the Nexus gate grow on her displays. Even thousands of kilometers away, the structure dominated space like a forgotten god. Its concentric rings glowed with contained energy, and occasionally, pulses of blue light traversed its surface as evacuation ships passed through its perimeter. Captain, I'm tracking 117 civilian vessels in the immediate sector, Sarah Okonkwo reported. Mostly converted cargo transports and colony ships. They're moving as fast as possible, but some of them have damaged propulsion. Transmit our intentions to Evacuation Command, Eleanor ordered. Let them know we're creating a window of time. They need to use every second. Maria Santos studied the tactical data with laser intensity. Captain, the shadow is now 90 minutes from the gate's perimeter, and I finally got some decent sensor readings. What do we have? Santos swallowed hard before answering. It's bigger than we thought. Much bigger. Estimated mass exceeds 3 combined Keltharian battle fleets. But here's the really disturbing part. It's not solid. It's as if it's composed of millions of individual components moving in coordinated formation. Eleanor felt a shiver. A swarm. Exactly, and each individual component seems capable of independent adaptation. When the Keltharian fleets fired beam weapons, the Shadow reconfigured its molecular structure to absorb and redirect the energy. When they tried kinetic missiles, it simply dispersed and reformed. It's like fighting intelligent, dark water. And our approach is different because... Santos smiled with a trace of madness. Because we're not trying to fight it logically. We're doing something so stupid and unpredictable that hopefully it won't have a response protocol. The bridge communicator crackled. Captain, Morrison here. The special package is ready for delivery, but you'll want to see this personally. Eleanor left Santos in charge and went down to the workshop. What she found made her stop abruptly. The 5 members of the infiltration team stood in a line, wearing what could only be described as a Keltharian safety engineer's nightmare. Their EVA suits had been completely rebuilt, covered with layers of improvised insulation, repurposed solar panels from auxiliary power systems, and structural reinforcements that looked like they'd been ripped from the ship's walls. I know what you're thinking, Morrison said, adjusting an oxygen tank that was definitely not within regulatory specifications. But it works. We tested it in a vacuum chamber. These suits will withstand from -200 to +200 degrees for at least 3 hours. At least, Eleanor repeated. Technically, the margins of error are plus or minus 40 minutes, but let's be optimistic. Chen carried a backpack containing the antimatter device, now wrapped in more layers of protection. Captain, I've calculated the route through the maintenance tunnel. If everything goes perfectly, we can reach the energy core in 2 hours and 10 minutes. And if it doesn't go perfectly, then we'll have a very interesting death to study if there were anyone alive to study it. Petrov commented with that morbid humor only Russian scientists seem to master. Eleanor observed each member of her team. Morrison, who had turned scrap into miracles more times than she could count. Chen, whose precision and calm under pressure had saved the ship countless times. Santos, whose courage bordered on recklessness but never crossed the line. Okonkwo, whose emotional intelligence kept the crew together in the darkest moments. And Petrov, whose brilliance was surpassed only by his absolute loyalty. "You know this is a one-way trip, right?" she said softly. "Captain," Morrison replied, "everything in life is a one-way trip. The question is what we do with the journey." Before Eleanor could respond, the bridge alarm sounded. She rushed back, the infiltration team on her heels. Santos was tense at her station. "Captain, the shadow has detected our approach. It's accelerating. New estimate, 58 minutes until contact." On the main screen, the dark blotch seemed to pulse, as if breathing. And then, for the first time, Eleanor saw its true form. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a single entity. It was a swarm of billions of black fragments, each the size of a human fist, moving in perfect synchronicity. Wherever they passed, the starlight simply vanished, absorbed in a hunger that transcended known physics. "My God," Okonkwo whispered. "It's beautiful, terrifying, but beautiful." "Captain, we have a problem," Santos said. "The shadow is releasing what appear to be reconnaissance probes, small swarms that have detached from the main mass. They're spreading out in a scanning pattern." "Seeking targets," Eleanor murmured. "It's learning to hunt." The communicator crackled with Admiral Thexlar's voice. "Captain Vance, the last evacuation ships are crossing the gate now. You have a 45-minute window before we need to seal it manually." 45 minutes. 58 until the shadow arrived. The numbers didn't work. They would have to begin the infiltration before all civilian ships were safe. Eleanor made her decision in 3 heartbeats. "Lieutenant Ramos, initiate an evasive approach to the gate. Keep us moving randomly. Nothing the shadow can predict. Infiltration team, you launch in 20 minutes, directly into the North Sector access tunnels. Morrison, is that device armed and ready?" "Can arm it at launch," Morrison confirmed. "Then do it. Santos, I want you to prepare our railguns. We won't cause damage, but we can certainly be annoying." Santos smiled fiercely. "Annoying is my specialty, Captain." The Fortitude plunged into a series of evasive maneuvers that made the inertial dampeners scream in protest. Eleanor watched the timer count down relentlessly, aware that every second represented lives being saved on the other side of the gate. "Infiltration team, proceed to the launch bay," she ordered. They left in silence, only Morrison pausing at the door. "Captain, it's been an honor to serve under your command." "The honor is mine, Jake. Now go save the galaxy with some good old jury-rigging." "Yes, ma'am." 15 minutes later, Eleanor watched through external cameras as 5 small figures were ejected from the Fortitude, propelled by nitrogen jets towards the gate's maintenance tunnels. They seemed absurdly fragile against the immensity of the megastructure, ants attacking a continent. "Good luck," Sarah Okonkwo whispered. On the main screen, the shadow continued to advance, a dark tide of inevitability. And Eleanor Vance, captain of an obsolete ship, crewed by humans the galaxy considered primitive, prepared to prove that sometimes the greatest strength didn't come from technology. It came from the absolute refusal to give up. The interior of the Nexus Gate's maintenance tunnels was like entering the veins of a dying god. Walls of crystalline metal pulsed with faint blue light, reflecting shapes the human mind couldn't fully process. Morrison led the team through the darkness, his helmet lamp cutting through shadows that seemed 18,000 years old. External temperature minus 162 degrees, Kai Chen reported, his eyes fixed on his helmet's internal display. Suit heating systems operating at 83% capacity. And we've only covered 200 meters, Santos murmured. We're going to need all our power autonomy. The tunnel stretched ahead like an endless artery, gentle curves always leading downwards, always inwards, towards the pulsating heart of the megastructure. Morrison consulted the holographic map projected on his visor, comparing their position with the architectural plans Admiral Thexlar had provided. Next junction in 50 meters, he said, we turn left and then face a vertical shaft of almost 3 kilometers. 3 kilometers? Okonkwo repeated. Going down or up? Both. The tunnel snakes around the main energy conduits. Petrov, who came last, carrying scientific measurement equipment, made a casual observation. Did you notice there's no artificial gravity here? The original builders clearly didn't expect organic visitors. Then we're making history, Santos said. First humans to walk inside the Nexus Gate. If we survive, they'll write dissertations about it. When we survive, Morrison corrected automatically, though his voice lacked conviction. They reached the junction and turned into the side corridor. Immediately, the environment changed. Where the previous tunnel was cold, dark metal, this new corridor glowed with barely contained energy. Conduits, the size of trees, ran parallel to their path, pulsing with light that varied from deep blue to blinding white. Temperature rising, Chen warned, plus 42 degrees, cooling system compensating. How long can we maintain this? Morrison asked. Depends on how many times the temperature fluctuates. Each cycle drains the batteries. At the current rate, maybe 2 hours before systems start failing. Morrison did the calculations mentally. 2 hours and 10 minutes to the energy core. Zero margin of error. Perfect. We keep going, he decided. Maximum speed, but watch your step. These conduits probably carry enough energy to fry our suits if we touch the wrong surface. They moved with deliberate care. Each step, a negotiation between speed and safety. The tunnel began to descend at a sharp angle, and Morrison activated the magnetic grappling hooks on his boots to maintain traction. On the Fortitude, Eleanor watched the timer tick relentlessly. The infiltration team had been inside the gate for 27 minutes. The shadow was now 22 minutes from the defense perimeter. Captain, the shadow's probes are approaching, Santos reported, counting 37 individual formations. They seem to be testing our responses. Show them something interesting, Eleanor said. Fire a railgun salvo on the north axis. Target the outer formations. Captain, our weapons won't penetrate their defenses. I don't need them to penetrate, I just need them to get attention. The Fortitude's railguns groaned, their firing systems so ancient. They still used physical ammunition instead of directed energy. 3 tungsten projectiles were launched at relativistic speeds, each carrying enough kinetic energy to destroy a small space station. They streaked across the vacuum and impacted the shadow's outer formation. For a moment, it seemed nothing had happened. Then, like a wound closing, the shadow's black fragments dispersed and reformed, completely absorbing the kinetic energy. But the important thing was that its attention had been drawn. The probes changed course, converging on the fortitude. "It worked," Santos said. "They're coming for us." "Ramos, evasive maneuvers. Keep us moving, but don't stray too far from the gate. We need to be bait, not an easy target." "Understood, Captain. Initiating Delta 6 flight pattern." The Fortitude danced through space, her engines roaring in protest, as Ramos executed maneuvers that would have made trained military pilots question his sanity. The Shadow's probes pursued, trying to predict patterns in movements that had no pattern at all, because Ramos wasn't following tactical protocol. He was improvising, letting instinct and intuition guide every turn and dive. And the Shadow, programmed to anticipate logic, struggled to process pure chaos. "Another 15 minutes until the main mass arrives," Santos updated. "The probes aren't attacking. They're just observing." "Learning," Eleanor said grimly. "Every move we make, it catalogues, studies, prepares countermeasures. Then we stop repeating ourselves," Ramos decided, and executed a maneuver that made the structural stress alarms scream. The Fortitude spun 180 degrees in less than 2 seconds, her inertial stabilizers barely managing to keep the crew conscious. The probes hesitated, only for a second, but it was long enough. The tunnels Morrison and his team reached the vertical shaft. Looking down, all they could see was darkness, punctuated by occasional pulses of blue light from the depths. 3,200 meters, Chen said, tossing a chemical light stick into the abyss. They watched it fall, its light growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. "This is going to be fun." "Fun isn't the word I'd use," Okonkwo murmured. Morrison checked his rappel lines. The technology was absurdly primitive compared to the anti-gravity systems the Keltharians would use, but it had the advantage of being simple and reliable. You clipped in, double-checked, and trusted the material's tensile strength. "We go down in pairs," he instructed. "Chen and Santos first, then me and Okonkwo. Petrov, you bring up the rear with the device, slow and steady. If one cable fails, the backup system should hold. But let's avoid testing that." The descent was an exercise in controlled terror. The shaft was so narrow they had to squeeze against the walls, their suits brushing against ancient metal that groaned under the touch. The temperature fluctuated wildly, going from freezing to scorching at irregular intervals that pushed their thermal control systems to the limit. "My display is showing intermittent failure on the right shoulder seal," Santos reported after 40 minutes of descent. "Nothing critical yet, but it's leaking heat." "Can you continue?" Morrison asked. "Didn't come this far to give up now." 2,000 meters below, the shaft opened into a colossal chamber. When Morrison emerged, his breath caught for a moment. They were suspended in the heart of the gate, surrounded by 8 antimatter reactors the size of skyscrapers. Each glowed with a light that seemed to come from within matter itself. Deep blue mixed with violet and occasional flashes of pure white. "This is impossible," Petrov whispered, scientific awe overcoming fear. "The energy containment here, it should collapse under its own gravitational weight. How does this even work?" "We don't need to understand how it works," Morrison said, landing on the central maintenance platform. "We just need to break it in a very specific way." Chen was consulting the map. The access point for the control system is 200 meters north. But look, he pointed. Between them and their objective, a web of crackling energy fields shimmered in the vacuum, security barriers designed to prevent any unauthorized approach to critical systems. Anyone see controls to deactivate this? Okonkwo asked. There probably are, Morrison replied, but they'd only be accessible through Keltharian authorization systems that we don't have, so we need to improvise. He approached the nearest field, studying its geometry. The energy patterns pulsed at regular intervals, creating moments of relative weakness when two fields intersected. Here, he said, marking a specific point. Every 17 seconds, there's a 2-second window when the field intensity drops 42%. Still enough to fry our suits, but maybe not instantly. Maybe? Santos repeated. Do you have a better idea? Silence. Then, we're going to have to jump. On the Fortitude, the proximity alarm sounded. The main mass of the shadow had reached the gate's perimeter. Captain, it's fragmenting, Santos reported, horror in her voice. Breaking into thousands of smaller formations, it looks like it's trying to surround not just the gate, but the entire surrounding area. It's isolating escape routes, Eleanor understood, ensuring nothing escapes when it finally attacks. Last evacuation ship just crossed the gate. Okonkwo updated. All civilians are safe. Eleanor felt an immense weight leave her shoulders. The primary mission was complete. Now all that remained was to ensure the shadow couldn't pursue. Morrison's status, she called over the communicator. The engineer's voice crackled through massive interference. Reach the core, but there are complications. Security fields. We need more time. You have 8 minutes before the shadow is on top of you. Then we better work fast. The transmission cut out. Eleanor looked at the screen, showing the shadow. Now so close, they could see individual details of its component fragments. Each piece was a masterpiece of impossible geometry, surfaces that reflected light that didn't exist. Captain, Ramos said calmly, if we're going to get out of here, we need to go now. Eleanor knew he was right. The escape window was closing. In minutes, they would be surrounded. But there were 5 people still inside that gate. 5 humans who had trusted her. Hold position, she ordered. We don't leave anyone behind. And out there, the shadow continued its inevitable advance. Morrison counted the seconds in his head, watching the energy fields pulse in their hypnotic rhythm. 16, 17. The field weakened, its bright blue coloration momentarily paler. Now! He jumped. The field was still active, and even in its weakened state, it tore a scream from his lips as the energy burned through the suit. His structural integrity display exploded with red alerts, but he was on the other side, rolling to absorb the impact onto a platform that hadn't seen footsteps in 18,000 years. Morrison, status, Chen shouted. Functional. Come on, one at a time. Santos, you're next. They crossed one by one, each passage leaving burn marks on their suits and draining precious energy reserves. When Petrov finally landed, carrying the antimatter device, 3 of the 5 suits showed critical system failures. No turning back now, Okonkwo observed, looking at the energy fields. Behind them, our suits wouldn't handle a second pass. Then let's finish this, Morrison said, approaching the central control panel. The interface was a mix of ancient technology and modern updates, layers of different civilizations trying to maintain a system none of them truly understood completely. Morrison connected his tablet, initiating hack sequences Chen had programmed during the journey. Reactor 1 containment system is responding, Chen reported, establishing bypass on security protocols. Reactor 3 too, Santos added, but the alarm systems will trigger as soon as we tamper with the main controls. Let them, Morrison said. In 5 minutes. No, one will be alive to respond to the alarms anyway. Petrov was already assembling the antimatter device, his gloved hands, working with precision that defied their conditions. The mechanism was elegant in its brutal simplicity. Once activated, it would force all 8 reactors into simultaneous overload, overpowering their containment systems and creating an energy cascade that would collapse into a localized gravitational singularity. Timer set for detonation in 40 minutes, Petrov said. Once activated, it's irreversible. Morrison looked at his team. Sweaty faces inside helmets, eyes determined, but aware of what they were about to do. There would be no heroes returning home, no parades or medals or stories told in space station bars, just silence and the certainty that billions would live because 5 people decided some things were worth more than their own lives. Anyone want to say anything? He asked. Yes, Santos replied. Let's make this worth it. Morrison activated the device. Immediately, alarms began to blare throughout the entire megastructure. Red emergency lights pulsed as millennia-old security systems awakened, detecting the threat to the reactors, but unable to process an adequate response. After all, who would be crazy enough to deliberately sabotage the gate's energetic heart? Humans. That was the answer. On the Fortitude, Eleanor heard Morrison over the communicator. Device active, Captain. Detonation in 39 minutes. Now would be an excellent time for you to reconsider your position. Negative, Morrison. We still have work here. And they did. The shadow had completed its encirclement, black fragments forming a perfect sphere around the gate and the Fortitude. It wasn't attacking, just observing, analyzing, waiting for the ideal moment. Captain, it's giving me the creeps, Ramos admitted. It's like it's studying us. Because it is, Eleanor replied. It wants to understand what makes us different. Why our tactic works when others failed. Santos had a thoughtful expression. Then let's give it something to study it will never forget. She opened a communication channel on all frequencies, transmitting not only to the Shadow, but to all remaining ships in the sector, to Admiral Thexler, to anyone listening. This is Captain Eleanor Vance, of the human vessel UNSS Fortitude, to the species of the galaxy who observe us. You called us primitive. You said our technology was obsolete, our methods illogical, our presence a tolerated inconvenience. And perhaps you were right about the technology. But if there is one thing humanity has learned in its short and bloody history, it is that survival is not about having the best weapons. It's about being willing to do what is necessary when all else has failed. She paused, aware that every word was being recorded, translated, transmitted across millions of light years. The Shadow believes it can study us, learn our patterns, adapt to our strategies. But there is one thing no logic can anticipate: the absolute irrationality of conscious sacrifice. In 23 minutes, the Nexus Gate will collapse, and we, the crew of the Fortitude, will ensure the Shadow is trapped here when it happens. Santos cut the transmission and looked at Eleanor. Inspiring speech, Captain. But how exactly are we going to trap an entity that can disperse and reform at will. By being unpredictable to the very end, Eleanor replied. Ramos, take me straight to the center of the Shadow's formation. Maximum speed. Captain, that's an order, Lieutenant. The Fortitude accelerated, diving through the Shadow's outer layers. The black fragments dispersed momentarily, then closed behind the ship like dark water. Suddenly, they were surrounded by absolute darkness. Even the light of distant stars blocked. Lost visual contact with outer space, Ramos reported. Navigating by instruments only. The sensors showed something extraordinary. The Shadow wasn't trying to destroy them. It was enveloping them, probing the ship's structure with energy tendrils that sought to understand, catalog, dissect. It's trying to absorb us, Santos said, in awe. Not as destruction, but as assimilation. Then we'll give it indigestion, Eleanor said. Overload all energy systems, reactors to maximum, shields pulsing at random frequencies, even activate the kitchen microwave if you need to. I want us to be the most chaotic and unpredictable signal it has ever encountered. The crew worked in coordinated frenzy, transforming their ship into a cacophony of uncontrolled energy. Systems screamed in protest, alarms blared in discord, and the entire structure of the Fortitude vibrated like an untuned tuning fork, and the Shadow hesitated. For the first time since it had appeared, the entity demonstrated something beyond perfect adaptation. It was confused, disorganized, trying to process sensory input that violated all logical patterns. It's working, Okonkwo whispered. It doesn't know how to catalog us. In the tunnels, Morrison watched the timer count down. 15 minutes. The energy core already showed signs of instability. The reactors beginning to resonate at dangerous frequencies. Everyone, he said calmly, it's been an honor. The honor was ours, Chen replied. Santos laughed, a humorless sound. Do you think they'll write songs about us? If anyone survives to write them, yes, Petrov said. They sat together on the platform, leaning against each other for basic human comfort, watching as the galaxy's greatest architectural achievement began to self-destruct at their own hands. 10 minutes. On the Fortitude, systems began to fail. Not catastrophically, but gradually. Parts breaking. Under stress they were never designed to withstand. Captain, we've lost the secondary reactor, Ramos reported. Propulsion dropping to 60%. Maintain course. 5 minutes. The Shadow was changing now. Its fragments no longer moved in perfect synchronicity. Some hesitated. Others accelerated. The confusion was spreading through its collective consciousness like a virus. It's disintegrating, Santos said in awe. Not physically, but cognitively. It can't process pure chaos. 3 minutes. Captain Vance. Morrison's voice crackled through massive static. Just wanted to let you know, you're the best commander we ever had, and if there's anything after this, I'll save a drink for you. Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes, but her voice remained steady. Save two, Morrison. I'll need it after all this stress. 1 minute. The Nexus Gate began to emit a light that belonged to no known spectrum. Deep blue, mixed with violet, and flashes of something human vision couldn't even process. The structure was groaning, a subsonic frequency that could be felt in the bones. All ship systems to maximum, Eleanor ordered. When this thing explodes, I want them to feel our energy signature across the entire damn galaxy. 30 seconds. Morrison closed his eyes. Chen held Santos's hand. Okonkwo murmured a prayer in Yoruba. Petrov just smiled, thinking of all the equations he would never solve. 10 seconds. Eleanor looked at her crew, at these ordinary people who chose to do something extraordinary. "It's been an honor," she said simply. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Nexus Gate did not explode. It collapsed. Its 8 reactors reached singularity simultaneously, creating a point of gravity so intense that space-time itself began to fold inwards. The 300-kilometer structure compressed into an impossible point of light, and then imploded in total silence. The shadow, caught in the gravitational pull, fragmented and was dragged inside. Billions of black pieces struggling against the inevitable, disintegrating as they crossed the event horizon. And the fortitude at the center of it all shone one last time before being consumed by the darkness. But in the final moment, before the light completely disappeared, Eleanor Vance smiled, because they had won. The silence that followed the collapse of the Nexus Gate was the kind that came not from the absence of sound, but from the presence of something so profound that words failed. Where once the galaxy's largest artificial structure had existed, there was now only a peculiar void, a wound in the fabric of space marked by residual gravitational distortions that would take centuries to stabilize. Aboard the Keltharian flagship, Admiral Thexlar observed the sensor data with something close to disbelief. His carapace had been repaired, his vital fluid restored, but the wounds to his understanding of the universe would remain for much longer. Confirmation from all tracking stations, his scientific officer reported, a Zentari whose translucent skin glowed with patterns of mourning. The gate is destroyed. The gravitational anomaly is stabilizing into a smaller singularity. And the shadow vanished, Thexler completed. No residual energy signature, no detectable fragments, as if it never existed. And the human ship? Thexler touched his console, bringing up the Fortitude's last telemetry data. The readings were chaotic, impossible until the very end. And then they simply stopped. A clean cut. Digital silence. "Captain Vance and her crew are lost," he said calmly, though his translated voice carried a weight his subordinates had rarely heard. 43 humans on an obsolete ship accomplished what 3 combined fleets could not. "Sir," the communications officer said, "we are receiving transmissions from all evacuation fleets. 2,400,000,000,000 civilians have reached the safe sectors. 0 casualties. 0 casualties. Except for the 43 lives that had bought that result with their own sacrifice." Thexlar activated a broadcast channel on all frequencies, his voice being retransmitted across millions of ships, stations, and worlds. Today, the galaxy learned a painful but necessary lesson. Advanced technology does not guarantee wisdom. Superior power does not assure victory. And those we considered primitive may possess strengths our civilization has long forgotten. He paused, aware that his words would define policies for generations. Humanity will be recognized, not as an emergent species, but as a full member of the Galactic Council. Their unorthodox methods, their willingness to sacrifice, their capacity for improvisation in the face of the impossible. These qualities are not weaknesses to be corrected, but strengths to be respected. And never, never again will we call their fortitude primitiveness. The transmission cut out. Thexlar looked at the void where the gate had existed, and in his crystalline chitin heart, he felt something new. Not awe, not gratitude, but something deeper. Hope that perhaps the galaxy could learn before it was too late. 3 days later, an escape pod was detected, floating at the edge of the gravitational exclusion zone. Its signature was so weak, it was almost dismissed as debris. But a young sensor officer, trained by humans at a trading post, recognized the archaic transmission pattern. "Admiral, it's a human emergency beacon. Ancient, but functional." The pod was recovered 27 minutes later. When the hatch opened, 5 figures stumbled out, their EVA suits destroyed, their faces etched with extreme fatigue, but alive. Morrison, Chen, Santos, Okonkwo, and Petrov had survived. How? Was all Thexlar could ask when he met them in the infirmary. Morrison, connected to a dozen life support tubes but conscious, smiled weakly. "Jury-rigging, Admiral. When we realized we couldn't get back to the Fortitude in time, we looked for alternatives. We found an emergency maintenance escape pod, so old it didn't even appear in the gate's current records. It was designed for mechanical drones," Petrov added, his voice hoarse. "It had no life support, no radiation shielding, but it had a basic subluminal engine. So we improvised," Chen continued. "We cannibalized our own EVA suits, created an atmospheric containment field using portable generators, and sealed ourselves inside seconds before the collapse." Santos laughed, a weak but genuine sound. "We spent 72 hours in a metal box the size of a closet, sharing air that was supposed to last a single drone. For 6 hours, it was uncomfortable. But it worked," Okonkwo said simply. Thexlar looked at them with something akin to reverence. "And your captain?" Eleanor Vance. The silence that followed carried its own answer. Morrison closed his eyes. "She remained on the Fortitude. Someone needed to keep the ship operational until the end, to ensure the shadow remained focused on them and not on our escaping pod. Eleanor was always the kind of leader who stayed last." 18 other crew members survived too, Chen added, ejected in escape pods before the final implosion. But Eleanor and 24 others, they ensured we had our chance. Thexlar bowed his head in a Keltharian gesture of profound respect. "They will be remembered, their names inscribed in the Galactic Heroes Memorial, and the story of their sacrifice will be taught to every child on every world of the Coalition." 2 months later, a ceremony was held in the space where the Nexus Gate had existed. Thousands of ships from hundreds of different species formed a ring around the gravitational anomaly, their lights shining in silent homage. Morrison stood on the bridge of a new ship, a human Keltharian hybrid construction called the UNSS Vance, designed using the best of both philosophies. Advanced technology, yes, but with room for improvisation. Redundant systems, but with scope for creativity. "Commemorating or mourning?" a familiar voice asked. He turned to see Dr. Yuri Petrov, now Chief Scientific Advisor to the Unified Galactic Defense Initiative. The program had been established specifically to integrate human methodologies into coalition military strategies. "Both," Morrison admitted. "Eleanor would have deserved to see this, deserved to know her death meant something." "She knows," Petrov said with certainty. "Wherever she is, she knows." The ceremony began with speeches from galactic leaders, each acknowledging the invaluable debt to humanity. But it was the final speech, broadcast on all known frequencies, that would echo through the centuries. Kai Chen, now captain of the Vance, spoke with a clear, firm voice. Eleanor Vance taught me that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to search for solutions when there are no obvious ones. Humanity isn't special because we have superior technology or unmatched strength. We are special because we never learned when to give up. He looked at the gravitational anomaly, at the grieve of 25 heroes. The galaxy asks us what the human factor is. It is this: the absolute refusal to accept that any problem is truly impossible. It is the ability to look into the abyss and not just survive, but find a way to make the abyss retreat. The broadcast showed images of Eleanor, Morrison, and the others, not as superheroes, but as ordinary people. Engineers covered in grease, scientists with fogged glasses, pilots with battle scars, people who chose to do something extraordinary because it was necessary. And now, Jen continued, we face a new challenge. Images changed, showing long-range sensor data, anomalies in deep space, distortions that didn't fit any known physics, signs of something approaching from the outer arms of the galaxy. A new threat is coming, Chen said, something that makes the shadow seem merely a prelude. But this time, the galaxy does not face it divided between advanced and primitive species. We face it together, combining Keltharian logic with human improvisation, Centauri technology with Terran determination. He paused, letting his words resonate. Eleanor Vance once told me that survival isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up. So, Galaxy, when this new threat arrives, we will show it something no cosmic force has ever seen. Different species, different philosophies, different technologies, all united by a single truth. His voice gained strength, carrying conviction that crossed light years. That you can knock us down, you can make us bleed, you can push us to the absolute limit of existence, but as long as a single heart still beats, as long as a single mind still thinks, as long as a single voice can still shout defiance into the void, we will never, ever give up. The memorial ended not with mourning, but with determination. The ships dispersed, returning to their worlds and missions, but carrying something new. An understanding that technology alone would never be enough. That sometimes the solution to impossible problems required not just logic, but courage. Not just calculation, but heart. Morrison remained on the Uvances bridge after everyone had left, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the new threat was approaching, and somewhere out there, other species were learning what it meant to be human. Not in biology, not in technology, but in spirit. The ability to look at the impossible and say, maybe. The willingness to sacrifice everything for those we would never know. The absolute stubbornness to believe that tomorrow could be better, even when today seemed hopeless. That was the human factor, and as long as it existed, the galaxy would have a chance. No matter what came next. End of story. If the tenacity of the human crew inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more chronicles from the galactic frontier. Humanity may not have the best weapons or the fastest ships, but we have something no technology can replicate: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. And sometimes that's all we need to change the fate of trillions. Activate notifications to not miss the next HFY, stories where we repeatedly prove that underestimating humanity is always a fatal mistake. Because when the universe says impossible, we just reply, hold my beer, and watch me make jury-rigging work.